Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be digging into yet another user submission, this time, or actually once again sent in by Dan Ossify. And Dan, we love you. You're after sending us great, this is like the third or fourth story we've done that you've sent in. Great stories, obviously, which is why we keep taking them. But again, just another example of a interesting life that, you know, is had by some of our viewers. Dan's story involves, you know, it's a little bit different this time. He ends up getting, I don't know if, let's just say this. He does some things against his better judgment. And he gets...
we all?
Oh, we always do. We're men. We're men of temptation. And in Dan's case, actually something good comes out of it when another entity takes over his body and he gets strength beyond normal man. Strength enough to deal with a situation that he wouldn't otherwise be able to deal with. This story, by the way, is called Painted Black on the official website, partially because of the type of entity that goes into Dan and the fact that his eyes turn black when it happens. Before we get into that story, if you have an effed up story on the paranormal or pictures or video, we would like to get it. You can get that to us on our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. We'll get it on the website, and we will get it into the podcast. We are making an effort to get all of our submissions into podcasts. And again, we are looking for stories. No, we want anything you have, but we're particularly looking for stories on cryptozoology. So if you have a story where you have dealt with a beast not of normal nature, perhaps hunting, something where you're out in the wilderness, you came across something you couldn't explain, we're really interested in those stories for an upcoming podcast. And we're aware we missed Monday, and we might not get an episode of it on Friday. It's kind of up in the air at this moment. You know, life happens. But we will hopefully be picking up again next week, again with 3 a week. So with that having been said, we're going to jump into Dan Ossify's story, Painted Black. So this story takes place on a sunny winter day. It was September 15th, 2004. Dan was 9 years old. And if you remember, we just did a story on his spell book. Remember, A Spell Gone Wrong? He was young in that age, in that story too. So Dan has a rich upbringing with the paranormal. I think in part because his grandfather taught him a lot and passed on a lot of his knowledge, not just in words, but in a book. And again, this is referenced in this story. But you know, I'm kind of curious how long this goes, how many experiences Dan had. But anyway, so he's 9 years old. Dan and his friend were, they were getting ready to play outside. He put on his boots, he put on his winter clothes, went outside, and there he was going to meet his friend at the football court. But before he left, he noticed this black anomaly. He said it somehow looked familiar, almost like the light that you would see on a stage, but it was black, pure black, but it was also a little transparent. He said he got the sense that it was there, but at the same time it wasn't. I guess almost as if it was phasing in and out of our reality at the same time. And he was taken a little aback by it, but he shook it off, and he didn't really want to deal with it, and he just went off on his way to meet up with his friends. So after they had met up, they actually hung around for a while, right up until the evening, and then one of his friends, and he has this in quotations because it's not his real name. I guess this is an alias used to protect his identity, but for our purposes, we're going to call him Brad. And Brad thought it would be a good idea for, to have a sleepover with Dan that night. And so Dan was excited. He went back home. He packed up his things, said goodbye to his parents. And before he left, his parents specifically asked him to bring along his Bible. And I know that sounds like a strange thing unless you're a super religious family, but Dan took it into consideration because he has dealt with some pretty scary things that normally kids or even adults don't really deal with, and his parents were aware of this, and hence why they suggested that he bring it. So he went upstairs to look for his Bible, and he said he looked everywhere, but he couldn't find it. And after searching for a while, he went back downstairs and he asked his mom if she knew where it was. So she went up to help him look. And when they got upstairs, there it was sitting right on the table and right out in the open, kind of impossible to miss. So that was kind of strange. But there it was. He grabbed it and he left. So he's left the house. He's on his way towards Brad's house. And he sees this black anomaly again. But he said this time it had a distinct yellow color around it, but it was very black on the inside, almost like a marble. And he stretched out his hand in an effort to grab it, but it's like it flew around his hand as if to avoid contact, like it was intelligent. And he was just leaving the house when this happened, and his mom opened the door as he was, about to leave, and asked him if there was something that he had missed or he'd forgotten. And he looked back at her, and he said she had this very scared look on her face. It's like she knew something was wrong or something was about to happen. But he said no, he had everything he needed, and he just headed on his way towards Brad's. So on the way towards Brad's house, he thought about what this anomaly could be. I mean, he saw it 2 times. He wondered, could it be a fairy? Could it be some kind of dark dust? And then he was trying to reason how this, eliminate the possibilities. Like, how could dust fly around his arm like that? And after a while, he came to Brad's house. He just pushed it aside. And he knocked on his door, and suddenly he had this weird sensation that someone was looking at him. But, luckily the feeling was short-lived. Shortly after he knocked on the door, Brad's mother opened the door and let him in. And he said after, they hung out, right? I mean, they had their evening of fun. And after everybody had gone to bed, it was just Dan and Brad that was awake, and they began to talk about, that particular day. It was a snow day. And I understand the enthusiasm behind that, because it's so satisfying when you get woke up in the morning to go to school and you hate it and you just wish that you could stay home and sleep, and your mom comes in, or they're listening to the radio, and it's a snow day, so you get the day off. And that's what they had that particular day. And anyways, they were talking about how great that was, and then they were, what are we going to do tonight? How are we going to, what's the word I'm looking for? Make good of this day off that we've had. And so Brad suggested that they play with the Ouija board. We get so many stories with this, but anyway, they're going to play with the Ouija board. And he specifically wanted to play it with Dan, not just because they're friends, but Dan, especially for a 9-year-old, he knew a lot about it. He had experience with this thing. And at the time, Dan wasn't really totally on board with it. And he said, Brad even knew that, at this point in life, Dan had already been through some pretty harrowing, what the hell's the word I'm looking for? He had some bad times with this kind of thing, okay? So it's not exactly what he wanted to go play with, but he did persuade him. And, even though it was against his better judgment, he went along with it. He wanted to make his friend happy. So before they began, Dan began to read something that he had written on a piece of paper. And what it was the precautions that they had to follow. And some of these precautions were things such as to clear their heads, to know what entity they wanted to specifically seek out, to know what we hope to gain from this communication with this entity, to know, what the specific entity that they were contacting. They needed to know the behavior that it had. And of course, they had to know how to properly end the session. So they wanted to be fairly well prepared so that, they were safe. And he said that they read through this list of precautions 3 times. So they would be certain that they knew the basics, that they were going to be safe. And he also brought the book that his grandpa passed on to him. And I know that's not a whole lot of information if this is your first time hearing one of his stories, but he references this book in, I think, all of his stories. It is essentially a book that his grandfather had kept and, gave to Dan, or gave to his family when he passed on, and it contained a plethora of information on spirits, rituals, and all things of that nature. And so Dan was pretty well versed with this at this point, and he used it as a reference guide whenever he dealt with this stuff. So, they chose the entity that they wished to make contact with, and he said, like, he's not going to give us its name, just for the safety of, the readers and you guys, the listeners. And Ryan and another submitter had pointed this out before, that just the name is powerful, and it's not something that you should really know or play with unless you want to have a connection with this thing. It's basically dangerous to know it. So for this, just for reference for this story, we're going to refer to this entities as mute. Okay. So Dan begins this ritual by drawing a 5-pointed star with the symbol of Satan on it. So I'm assuming he means the goat or the Baphomet. And he spelled all the letters of the alphabet around the star. And after he drew it, he put it on, he drew this, or this thing that he drew, he put it on one side of the Ouija board, and he put black candles on the other side. And they decided that Dan was going to be the channel, I guess the medium of which that this communication was going to go through because of his prior experience. And after, they had made contact with several different entities, but they finally connected with the one that I mentioned earlier that they refer to as mute. And he said initially mute, he chatted and trolled like a casual person. I guess kind of like what a lot of people experience when they use the Ouija board. And all was well until Brad and Dan started to, and they weren't talking to the board, by the way. They were just kind of talking to one another. And they started to discuss a bully, that was at their school. And after they had brought up the bully, mute, this is the entity, said, "I can kill him if you would like." And Dan and Brad looked at each other. And Brad, he noted that Dan's eyes had actually changed from the way that they were when they began. He said that his eyes were suddenly black. And I'm not saying the pupil. I mean, his entire eyes were black. So you can kind of picture the black-eyed children, that kind of black. And Dan went to the mirror, and of course he freaked. This was true. His eyes were black. But he went back to the Ouija board, and both Dan and Brad told Mute that, they didn't want the bully to be killed or hurt. They were kind of spooked by, this whole, Dan's eyes turning black, and just the I guess the notion that the board had put forth. And so they told Mute they didn't want that to happen, and they closed the session. They blew out the candles, and Dan even set the piece of paper that he had written on fire, just to be sure that there was no link still there. And so with that, snow day had finally come to an end. They went to bed. They got up, and in the following morning, so this is mornings, the next day, they're at school. And, Dan was feeling good. He was feeling ready. He was ready to take on the day at school. And he said the first hours went by pretty fast. But then came lunch. And, as luck would have it, here comes this bully that they had spoke about the night before. And he said that this bully used to go around and just pound on people for their lunch money, or just because he felt like it. He was a real asshole. And he said, for whatever reason, he walked up to Brad, and, Dan was standing next to Brad as this happened. And he said he grabbed Brad, and he just started punching him in the face. And Dan said, he got this urge. He was going to kick the bully, on the side, but, it just so happens that the bully had friends there too. And he had two guys from the 10th grade, and they had grabbed Dan, and they were holding him. And he said, he shook and he tried to get loose so he could help Brad, but he just couldn't loosen that grip. So he just helplessly watched as Brad got pummeled by this asshole and could do nothing to help his friend. But then he said something began to stir inside of him. He said whatever it was taking him over. It was taking control of him. And he said his mind went empty, except all he could hear in his head was the name, Mute, or whatever the real name was. And he said the name echoed in his head, and it was spoken in his voice. It's like he knew it. It felt familiar. He knew what it was that took over. It was Mute. Mute took him over. And he said he felt this energy coming through him, and it mixed with his anger, and it mixed with his frustration. And he said he began to move his arms. And he said in just a single swing, the 10th graders that were holding him were thrown to the ground. And he said the bully turned around towards him, and he said he looked him in the eyes, and he said he could sense the bully's fear, his desperation, and his thoughts. And he said the bully threw Brad to the ground and began to swing towards Dan. And he said he could see it so clearly. He could see his movements. He said they were so slow. And he said he knew where he was going to hit. And with impossible strength, he took the bully's arm and he twisted it. And he said his arm made a cracking noise. And despite how sick that might sound, to him, somehow he enjoyed it. And he said the bully tried to kick him, but he took his leg and he twisted it too. And he said he fell to the floor and he was crying. And he said he knew this wasn't him, and he didn't like it, but he somehow managed to enjoy it. It was out of his character because it wasn't him. And he said it, despite all of this, it was very short-lived because, just as quickly as the presence had taken over his body, it left and he collapsed. And he said when he woke up, the school nurse said that he had these marks around his eyes and his body was very dehydrated. And he said Brad came to visit him, and he thanked him for his help. And Danny said he told Brad he didn't even do it. He said, but something inside of him did. He said that Brad told him that during this brawl, he actually noticed that Dan's eyes had changed yet again. And this time they turned black with a hint of red. And he said he looked into the mirror, but his eyes were blue, like they always had been. So this is a case, I don't know if you'd call it possession, but to me it sounds like, in the beginning, before they even went at the Ouija board, Dan had some kind of an entity that was following him. I mean, if we trace right back, he had this black anomalous shape or light, and it, he saw it in the morning. He saw it, it followed him to his friend's house. It seems to me like that was the entity all along. Perhaps it knew what stood in store for Dan in the short future. And when he went to the Ouija board, perhaps that's who he spoke to. And
well, I think we kind of touched on this kind of a theme before, the idea that, the use of a Ouija board, you're implicitly giving permission for something to use your hands to guide the planchette around the board. Now, I do believe we also covered the fact that when it comes to inviting, spirits or entities, into your body, it's not so simple as to say, come on in, but only into my hands. It doesn't quite work like that. It's a very binary thing. It's either yes or no. And in the case of this situation, whether this, obviously there was something lingering around Dan that day. Perhaps it was the entity. Perhaps it was just an observer. It's impossible to really tell. But either way, it's not a good situation to be going into a whole Ouija board session with, because you already have something floating around in, regular space. Now, if you go and, pick up a spirit fucking lightning rod, what we call a Ouija board, and more importantly, get together with a small group of people and you all pour your will into this, this focus item, because that's what we're really talking about here. You can turn anything. It's not that there's any special magic to a Ouija board or a crystal ball or tarot cards. It's that they're a focus for human will. And in this instance, they were using a Ouija board. And when you collect a bunch of people around a focus item and get them to focus on it, you can very easily open up pathways and reach out to things. And if those things were already present before the session even began, well, then you can probably be sure that, you're in for perhaps a little more intense experience. By all accounts, it was already there. There was something already there. You didn't need to call out. It was already hanging about. Dan had reached out and tried to grab this thing out of the air earlier that day.
Well, Dan seems to be a magnet for this type of, he draws these entities to him anyway. That's why we have so many stories from him.
And anybody who is introduced to the other world, introduced to these other things, either by others or their own curiosity, that's an inevitability, right? If you decide tomorrow to throw down your perfectly average life of playing baseball and riding bikes and playing frisbee, and hanging out with the boys at the local supermarket or outside the local corner store or something, and you decide to start, screwing around with the other world, spirits and whatnot, you become a beacon. You're a light in the darkness for all these different things, the good, the bad, and the neutral.
And I think something important to bring to light here is intent, right? Because Dan and Brad were at the Ouija board, and they said that they told it that they didn't want this entity to hurt or kill this bully. But, just because you say it doesn't mean that's what you feel. I mean, if he's a bully, you likely have anger towards him. And you know what? They deserve it, really. I mean, if you got some asshole, like if it were me, if that prick had done that shit to me, I would want him to be, I don't know if I'd say kill him, but I would certainly.
You'd be phoning me up for the directions for my destruction ritual.
For your destruction ritual, right? Because you know what? They deserve it, right? That could have been manifested karma right there, right? That entity following Dan around could have been manifested karma right there. And in this case, you know, Dan and Brad, you know, obviously they've probably had altercations with this guy before, and they've probably, you know, said no, you know, because we don't want the responsibility of having something bad happen to this guy as much as we hate him. But in their heart, they probably did. You can't help that. I mean, that's just the way you feel. I mean, if that guy, you know, had left scars on them emotionally, they can't help it. That's just, you know, that's nature. That's your outlook and the way you feel. I think that's nature's way of passing the puck back, right? I mean,
that's part of the idea of, you know, your own personal will.
Right.
You know?
So,
you may not even have total control over your own will. You know, you could be partially governed by your emotions in that regard, where you might, like you said, say something out loud. And I mean, we can call it will or intention. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you know, the fact that they had collected around a focus item and were pouring their will, whatever it may have been, into this focus item, and just so happened to have made contact with something that was, you know, yeah, I can kill him if you want, no big deal. You know, when you make contact with something like that, then, you know, that killing is no big deal. Then, you know, you've obviously come in contact with something that's not too friendly.
And, you know, I think in their case, you know, while they might have said no and they might have closed the session, they might have given, like you said, you know, you're using the Ouija board, you're giving permission to the entity that you're contacting with to manipulate your hands, whatever. In their mind, their intention and what they truly felt should be done with this guy, they probably gave permission, right?
Well, there's no, you know, I think there's no ambiguity to it. You know, as soon as you put your hands on that planchette and you say, you know, spirit, oh spirit, come guide my hands.
Right, but what I mean is
that's it. It's in.
What I mean is when the spirit asked if they wanted it to kill this guy, they might not have given permission for that, but I think on a some conscious level, even without saying it out loud, they gave permission for that entity to do something bad to this guy because they felt that
it's possible. But here's the thing: at that point, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't need their permission. It's already been invited in. There's some indication that perhaps it, you know, mute or whatever, was already able to manifest in this realm in the first place. And, you know, the fact that they gave, at least Dan gave permission to say, you know, come on in, guide my hands. That was it. That was all it needed. And no further permission is needed. The only reason an entity would ask a question like that is because now it's trying to corrupt you.
Yeah.
Right. Now, if you start to willingly say, oh, yeah, you know, let's do that. Let's, you know, I mean, it may get bored and just leave. But the fact that now it's planted that dark seed, right? That was it. That's enough. That's all it was looking to do, was to you know, find a couple of stupid children in its eyes, and plant a dark seed in them.
Well, I think also that it gets to live vicariously through people. To you know, a lot of these negative entities like to hurt and like to, you know, they enjoy the suffering of others. So the fact that they have any kind of a, you know, vessel that they could act out in, I think, is reason enough for them to do it. Now, that being said, I am a believer that what you put into this world, you get back.
You reap what you sow.
You reap what you sow. So, like, I understand why some people bully, like, they have hard lives or whatever, but it's no good to misdirect that onto, people who have nothing to do with that. And I really do believe that, if somebody bullies you or somebody does something bad to you, you can't help but be pissed off or angry, and then you're subconsciously, even if you're not that kind of person, on some mental level, your anger and stuff is being directed towards that person for what they did to you, and that builds up, right? I think that manifests itself and comes back. It could come back as bad luck, misfortune, accidents,
and it can also act to erode your own defenses.
Yeah, like
a normal healthy person, I don't think is directly possessible, right? But as soon as you enter a state of extreme rage or depression or sadness or some kind of very negative base emotion, you put yourself in a position where you're now vulnerable.
Yeah, I believe that too, and I also think that, like I said, you could subconsciously be sending off these bad vibes, and probably to people who rightfully deserve it, and you might not even be intentionally doing it, but also at the same time, by feeling that way, you tend to draw energy like that towards you, right? So if you're negative, you're going to draw negativity towards you as well, whereas if you're positive, you will draw positivity towards you. So I mean, that itself has an effect on what happens to you, and it's hard because it's hard to control your emotions, because certain things make you feel a certain way, and that's all there is to it. And that's why we have meditation, and we try to learn different perspectives, learn to forgive and forget. And I've had my own issues dealing with things and trying to get better at it, and trying not to. So I understand, not that I was ever a bully or anything like that, but, I understand how your anger and frustration can come out, basically at people people that don't deserve it, or you're not trying to target. I mean, everybody deals with that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, for anybody who's ever dealt with that kind of thing or has ever thought about it, that's some food for thought, right? Is that try not to do things to people that even if you were going to look at it in a selfish light, it will come back on you, right? So I think even if from a selfish point of view, it's not a good idea to be that way. But freedom of choice, free will, and all that, we're going to do what we choose to do. That's just my outlook and my perspective on the matter.
Yeah, I personally am a big advocate of revenge.
Yeah, well, me too. It's kind of hard to
in practice. I mean, I can't even give advice in that realm because I'm just too vindictive, too.
Well, in some level, I feel like it needs to level out, right? Right? I mean, as much as I'd like to say that I could just turn the other cheek, I often can't, right?
Well, that's my big problem with karma, because I'm like, well, if karma was real, so many good things wouldn't happen to me.
Yeah, but you're an outlier. You're actually, for you, Ryan, there's probably like just some really bad thing that hasn't happened yet.
There's a meteor on its way here with my name on it.
There's demons crawling around your apartment, just like, drooling, waiting for when. No, but as much as you like to brag about how bad of a person you are, in comparison to some really bad people, I don't think you're that bad. You're just.
Well, I don't kill and torture people. I mean, that's.
No, you're human with a very selfish twist, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of being.
Well, I think some people would argue that. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm just painting you in a nicer light than you might paint yourself.
Well, I just.
Hello?
cut out there. For me, it's I feel like I just should call a spade, you know. I mean, I just call it how I see it, I suppose.
Well, look, neither one of us are going to get Humanity of the Year. Now, you take things to a little bit of an extra level than I would, but neither one of us are like great people. But we're honest.
No model human beings here.
But we're honest with who we are, right? We're also not in church judging other people for, you know, that whole hypocritical thing. So at least we're true with who we are.
Screw you for sinning differently than I do.
Right.
That whole rhetoric. Yeah, like I love that one. You know.
Yeah. Well,
it's shame for sinning different than I sin.
Yeah.
Wow.
We accept everyone as long as you believe like exactly like we do. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But you know, and before everyone just fillets me for that, I just bad experiences with that whole thing, and so it may have made me a little bitter.
and also with you.
And also with you, yeah. We just need that echo drone of the whole room of people saying that now, right? But yeah, again, I'm not trying to diss religion. It's just it's not even that I'm against religion, like the concept of it and God and Jesus. I can buy into that. I just don't buy into the whole hypocritical way that a lot of Christians and so-called people go about it. I'm not even saying one religion is right. I think there's a little bit of truth in all of them, and it was never meant to be so easy as to be, I pick one, spoon-feed it to me, and I'm spiritually done. Yeah. I think we were meant to come down and work for it, meant to come down and pick the truth from the lies. I mean, you got to remember, all these stories, I mean, a lot of which originated out of ancient Samaria, has been twisted and turned by man. I mean, we're not talking about this is the word of God, so we believe it. This is the word of God as interpreted by man of many different cultures.
2,000 years or 5,000 years of history.
Exactly.
And human brains. It's like the longest game of telephone, you know.
And with humans, knowingly, I mean, we know this. You can go and research this. Have, through history, twisted the meaning of things and interpretation of things for their own gain, right? I mean,
for personal and political and financial gain.
Right. So, I mean, I'm not against religion or God, or like, I believe in God, right? I have no issue with that. I don't buy into the spoon-fed, just this one religion, this is it, right? I really do truly believe that we had to come down and work for it, figure out the answers on our own, and, you know, just look in every corner, under every crevice, and put together everything that we can. You know, I mean, life is meant to be hard. We're meant to toil. We're meant to, you know what I mean? Like, everything about life is hard. Unless you were born...
You can't just hit up church on Sunday, die on Tuesday, and be at the pearly gates by lunch.
Yeah, I mean, it just...
Experiencing total spiritual enlightenment.
It don't work that way. And by that same token, you know, people who... You know, for example, you take a rich person, right, and they donate some money, right, and they do it regularly, and maybe they do it because on their taxes they actually get a return that's more than that, right, or maybe it's good enough that it don't even matter. It doesn't even matter to them, but it's not really what's the word? It's not really it's not much to them. Like, they got so much money, it doesn't matter.
What you're talking about is the ratio of sacrifice.
Exactly.
A billionaire that donates $1 million to a church.
It's not the same as a homeless person donating a hamburger. I know it sounds silly, but
exactly. That's the basic print. I'm sure there's some fancy theologian, philosopher style term that goes on that, you know.
Right. And intent matters, right? Like, if you're donating like small bits of your money to look good or to build a political image or whatever the case is, if it's for selfish gain whatsoever, even if everybody else thinks it's a genuine donation, right? it doesn't count. Like the person who, like, God will know, right? I mean, that's when you die, they're gonna know. So I mean, none of that really matters. I think that at the end of the day, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We're all a little selfish. We're all have good qualities. We have the ability to be good, and we make these choices, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, for me, my side of it is I'm just going to live my life however the hell I want to, and all the rest of that shit be damned. And in fact, I'm compiling a list of complaints to make to whatever deity there is afterwards.
Why do my feet hurt?
When they start on the whole judgment thing, I'm going to let them. I'll sit there quietly and let him have his spiel and be like, "All right, you're done. All right, now I'm doing you, right? now we're doing. I'm turning the tables. I'm judging you now.
Where were you when I was stood up on prom?"
Never. I attended several proms. I've never stood up.
Yeah, me too. But it's just reference point for maybe something like that happened to you along the way to make you so bitter.
I really have no reason. It's just a deep-seated bitterness, from day one.
Well, maybe that could be your thing. Why do I have a deep-seated bitterness? I mean, it really wasn't fair. I was given this bitterness. There's nothing I could do about it.
You couldn't have made you made me broken and then expected me to work fine.
Yeah,
it's like getting mad at a car you didn't put wheels on. Why won't you move?
Well. So
anyway,
at the end of the day, you know what? I think given our personalities and where we're brought up and everything else, that we would probably always make the same choice. Free will be damned. Based on your personality, who you are, and your upbringing, and what you were shown, and the stuff you went through, 99% of the time, you'd probably make the same decision. And should you really be punished for that? Because you can't help where you were put, right?
Well, that's very true. I mean, we're all just biological machines,
just algorithms, man.
Doing the best we can to eke out a living. And I mean, for the most part, the fact that we're even here having a civilized conversation rather than out pillaging and terrorizing the countryside, I think is a testament to the fidelity of the human mind and its desire to create something better and greater. And I mean, some people really wholeheartedly believe that we can only do that through religion. Other people believe that look, there's entire communities of atheists out there who aren't just butchering and raping at will. So obviously there's some kind of intrinsic mechanism that just has we're a social species. And for the most part, we're going to be decent to one another. And I think that's all anybody can ask from anybody is just to, live your life the best that you can. And, at least, if you're not going to be good, at least just try to be a little decent.
Well, I honestly think that, we're put here on a mission, right? And we're going to do that mission whether we like it or not, because we've been put here with our personalities, with our parents, with our, maybe there's certain choices we get to take along the path. Actually, someone, I believe it was Kay, in her comments, she's a regular, and she mentioned something along the lines of the idea that, we could have these, maybe life is predestined. Like it's picked, like we pick our parents, we pick our troubles, our trials, but maybe along the way there are these certain choices we get to make that are branching points that will change, where we go from that point and what options become available. And maybe that's true, but you know what it made me think of? It made me think of how video games are these days, with these stories that branch based on your choices. And then I got into the notion of the idea that life itself is like a video game, is all algorithms and code. I mean, DNA is code, right? So maybe we're all in this very advanced, forget virtual reality as we know it, way more advanced than that. Our bodies are the controllers. It's so realistic that, we're in a different life as far as we know it. And that's all we're doing here. We're living these virtual reality lives to gain perspective and understanding. in a way that we can't in our spiritual bodies. Right? Maybe that's all it is.
It could very well be.
Yeah. So we cracked it. Where's our grant money? And
I guess we got to start a church now.
yeah.
Pass the collection plate along.
The Will and Ryan church. That's right. We need a collection plate. We'll get more shows done. I can guarantee it. You can send that to our email if you like. Collection plate our way.
Heaven forbid, eh?
Yeah. So, with that having been said, that's Dan's story and our long trailing ideas.
Meandering discourse.
Yeah, that's right, discourse. But we hope it provided an illuminating perspective. And I hope we didn't offend a lot of religious people who are going to put us on stakes for our opinion.
And hey, if we did, then for all you Christians out there, forgive us.
That's right. Jesus would do it. What would Jesus do?
You know, I offended you. You kind of got to forgive me.
That's right. That's their part of their shtick. They got to do it.
It's part of
or they're not true Christians. So if you criticize us, you're not true Christians. All right, I think we're covered, right?
Yeah, there you go.
We're covered. All right. So I hope you like Dan's story. Paint it black. Again, if you have an effed up story of your own, you can send that to effedupstories.com, or you can go there and send it on a submission form. Website is effedupstories.com. Again, we're particularly looking. I mean, we want anything. We'll post anything. But if you got stories on cryptozoology, that's something that we're hoping to do a show on soon. We haven't forgotten about the near-death experience one. We got lots of information. We're going to be doing it. It's probably just not going to be this week because we had some setbacks. Real life kind of creeping in there. But we will get it, if not this week, next week. And likewise, if we don't have an episode Friday, it's not because we're off having fun and partying and forgot about the show. It's just some things really came up and got in our way this week. So hopefully next week we'll be back on our 3 shows a week deal. Yeah. So be on the lookout for those, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Have a great night.